is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
Welcome to Spoil Me, covering The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu, brought to you by Kyle Summers, chapters 3 and 4. In these chapters, I'm very pleasantly surprised by the speed and efficacy of this love story. I'm here for love, just as long as, that's not all I'm here for. Welcome to Spoil Me. Kyle's first comment is, I know, right? Which, honestly, guys, so welcome to the show, first of all, I'm Natasha. But, yeah, we start off, with a setup that feels like it's going to be this long, protracted, my family won't allow me to be with you, but you must because I love you, but you're poor and no good, but I can be better. And I'm thinking, oh my God, are we really doing this? And surprise, he fixes things and marries her and is married to her within 5 pages. So I'm really glad about that because honestly, guys, I just have such a hard time getting into romance storylines. It's one of those things that it really has to be above average writing. And I'm talking about in books and on television and in movies for me to believe that two people love each other. It's a hard thing to put into words. It can be the chemistry of the actors. It can be the way that they talk to each other. But frequently, I find that authors overestimate how much I care about the two people. Or they overestimate how much I really think that they should even be together. Because there are a lot of times where, as a woman who's gotten older and seen more of the world and understands how relationships work and the different types of things that people face, there are a lot of times where an author betrays their own, lack of understanding by having two people want to be together that anybody with a brain can look at and be like, y'all should never date. This is a bad plan. So it's a really tricky line to balance where I welcome this sort of thing in a story, having people really care about each other, but having it be the main plot is genuinely a kiss of death most of the time. And part of what I really enjoy about A Song of Ice and Fire is that when there is a sort of love story like that, it gets treated in this way that's basically nobody has time for it. Sorry, but we know that you love each other and that's really sweet, but it's impractical. Nobody cares. It's bad for everyone. Get over yourselves. And they are forced to get over themselves in the most violent way ever. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. And I don't want to give the impression that I'm trying to be girls like romance and I'm not like most girls, because that's not how I feel at all. It's just that most of the people out there who do write romance or who try and force romantic plots aren't good at it. It's just kind of, I shouldn't just say that romance is harder to write because I feel like that's what I'm saying. It's more that bad romance for me is much more painful than bad action movies, for example, because there's an earnestness to it and there's a desire to get you emotionally engaged that feels all the more upsetting when it doesn't work versus an action scene that's not very good. You can just sort of laugh at it, But when romance isn't good, it's cringy. It's so awkward. I'm just thinking of last night, and I'm sorry, I'll drop this subject in a moment, but last night I was watching True Blood with my fiance, who he has never seen any of it. And it's like one of those trash shows that's really fun, but it is trash. And there's a point at which Sookie and Bill Compton have just gotten in a fight, and he's finally like comes up to her and is like, I can't change how I feel about you. What you've awakened in me. I will love you until, you know, the whole thing. And her response is, damn you, Bill Compton. And then she like makes out with him, and then they go have sex, and it's just so awkward. Oh my God. Damn you, Bill Compton. I just couldn't. I fucking burst out laughing. So yeah, so that's all I want to say about that. But I'm sure romance will come up in another series that I'm covering, and I'll have to mention this again because I just want you all to understand my mindset. And that way, when I try and describe the initial reaction that I have to different like plot points, you'll understand what I mean. So chapters 3 and 4 are the first two chapters of part 2, The Prophecy of the Fish. And chapter 3 starts off with 7 years later, Zudi, the 5th month in the 21st year of the reign of one bright heaven. So the emperor is still in charge. 7 years have passed since the last time that we saw Cooney. And Cooney is, for those of you who watched Community, Cooney is Jeff Winger, right? Like, he is really smart and really charming, but does not know what to do with it other than con people, pretty much, because he is used to things being easy for him because he's so charming. So he doesn't have to apply himself. And there's a line in Community that Jeff Winger says in the first episode that has always stuck with me, which is people are asking him, like, if he's worried about failing the class. He's a smart guy and he just needs to study for a couple hours and he'll be fine. And he says, yeah, but here's the thing about being smart is that if you are someone who is smart, you learn how to get through life without having to do any actual work. Which is a really, like, I don't want to, paint with a broad brush kind of thing, but that is something that I think can be really true. If you're somebody for whom things come easily, especially in the beginning of your life, when people are more willing to give you opportunities and you're, able to kind of dick around because you're dependent on other people for where you live and what you eat and whatever, you can sort of get this sense that, like, I'm ahead of everybody in school. Everybody's constantly telling me that I'm exceptional and I'm barely trying right now. Like, I'm not even, and yet everybody is continuously impressed and I am rewarded over and over again for how ahead of the game I am. And so you learn early on that making bare minimum effort gives you all kinds of praise and accolades because everyone else is just so impressed with you that whether or not it's actually hard work isn't relevant. And then you start to get older and being exceptional doesn't mean anything anymore because everybody has to work to survive now. You don't get to just be in a class with 7 other people who have everything provided for them and show off, and that's the end of your day. You have to go out and do something to keep yourself alive. And nobody cares how exceptional you are, except in very rare cases where you get a job where that kind of thing is recognized and rewarded. And the problem is that when you enter the job force, you do think that that's going to be the kind of job you find. That being exceptional and hardworking and whatever is going to be recognized and rewarded. But usually it's not. And it's a hard thing to get used to, that the bare minimum effort you used to be able to make and get pats on the back is simply irrelevant now to the way that you have to live. So Cooney is kind of going through that. Like, he realizes early that he's ahead and he starts to dick around a lot. And his parents, who had such high hopes for him, are really disappointed because they had been sort of bragging on him. And he basically disgraces them a little bit. Like, you know, like, think about it. If you are a parent, I'm thinking of it in terms of like a group of parents in like a suburban setting who there is a couple who has a kid that's really like outstanding in everything, and all they do is like talk nonstop about how advanced their child is. How satisfying is it for all the other parents who are sick of hearing about precious Kuni to find out that Kuni is a fuck up now? Like, so I feel simultaneously like bad for his parents, but also like a little bit, yeah, well, maybe you should have just not counted your chickens before they hatched. And I love this description. So him and his friend Rin Koda preferred to skip school whenever they could and go fishing. When he was caught, Kuni would apologize eloquently and profusely, convincing Master Lowing that he was truly contrite and had learned his lesson. But soon he would be back to devising pranks with Rin and talking back at his teacher, questioning his explanations of the classics and pointing out errors in his reasoning until Lowing finally ran out of patience and expelled him, and poor Rin Koda, too, for always following Kuni's lead. So the next paragraph after that starts with, that was just fine with Kuni, who always enjoyed drinking and brawling and talking. But he doesn't think about what that's like for Rin Koda, which I do not want to absolve Rin Koda of all responsibility, because obviously he's making the choice to follow Kuni with all of this. But I do feel like, you know, well, it was just fine with him since whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but what about Rin, who got kicked out and I don't think has the kind of personality that he can make resources for himself like this? But I'm guessing that Rin does not burn through all of the goodwill of his friends and family the way that Kuni does. Because after this, we see that, Kado, Kuni's elder brother, demonstrated an early instinct for business and became a local merchant of women's dresses. He hired Kuni as a clerk, but Kuni professed a disdain for bowing to customers and laughing at their stupid jokes. And finally, after Kuni tried to implement a harebrained scheme of hiring girls from the indigo houses as models for dresses, Kado had no choice but to fire him. By the time Kuni was 17, his father had enough of the idling young man coming home every night drunk and asking for dinner. He locked him out of the house and told him to find somewhere else to stay and ruminate on how he was wasting his life and breaking his mother's heart. So he goes and lives with his brother for a little while, but his brother's wife does not like him. And, you know, this is one of those things that, like, really is... I don't know if you all have ever been in a position where somebody has been banking on the goodwill of other people, but I have such trouble, like, with this particular kind of person who just decides to bounce from one person to another and, like, use them up until their relationship with that person is also ruined. Because, like, from, like, my sense of shame and pride would just never allow me to do this, and Kuni just doesn't give a shit. The only thing that really seems to get to him is his sister-in-law making it obvious that she doesn't want him there. She took to serving dinner early, long before Kuni came home, and when she heard the sound of his steps in the entrance hall, Tete would bang empty pots loudly in the sink, indicating that there was no more food to be had. Kuni quickly got the hint. Though he had thick skin, he had to when he hung out with the sorts of friends he made, he was humiliated that his sister-in-law thought of him as only a mouth that she didn't want to feed. He moved out and slept on the floor mats in the houses of his friends, roaming from house to house as he wore out his welcome. He moved a lot. So, like, the fact that she behaves like he's one more mouth that she doesn't want to feed, he can't stand, but he's fine being one more mouth that other people don't want to feed, because he goes and stays with all these friends who he clearly depends on in the same way. So he has some sense of shame. It's just, it seems like it takes a long time for it to get kicked in. Or maybe the shame only comes when it's somebody that, like, isn't super close to him. Like, his friends, when they sort of try and reprimand him in a later chapter for the way that he's acting, it doesn't seem to impact him at all. But I wonder about if it's like, if his friends' wives were like, I'm not letting that layabout stay here. Maybe that would bother him more, because it just surprises me that he actually left rather than just figure out a way to live on his own 2 feet. He doesn't just, oh, I'll show you. You don't want me here? Fine, I won't be here, and I'll make my own way. He's like, fine, I won't be here. I'll mooch off of somebody else. Which, okay, I mean, he's able to get by for quite a while like that. So who am I to even say anything? So let's see. So then we have a short scene where he's in an ale house, and the woman who runs the place, Wasu, is telling him that he has a really big tab that he needs to pay off. And Kuni talks his way out of it, basically, by being like, you know that business, when I'm here, goes up by like 50%. And privately, she's thinking that is an exaggeration, but it does go up like 30%. So it goes from her trying to tell him to pay her back, to him being like, you should be so lucky that I'm even here. And now that we're on the topic of my tab, do you think that you could take care of that for me? And she realizes that he totally has this leverage over her, that her business is better when he's there, and she kind of has to take care of his tab, or else he's going to go to some other ale house and draw all the customers over there. Because the thing is that he tells really good stories and is like, he's basically a bard, right? Like, he just has a lot of charisma. People want to be around him. People buy more drinks and are more active when he's there. It's a party. He's a party man. So I have to be honest, this scene made me dislike him, because it felt really like he was just so taking advantage of somebody so much, and really like heartless about it in a way. And then we have the scene right after that where he has so much heart, and I just didn't know what to make of it. So we get a little bit of background on this resettlement policy that the emperor has put into place for the nobles. The emperor realizes that if the nobles stay where they are, surrounded by family and allies and people who are familiar with them, that they could organize enough to rise up and take back their positions. So what the emperor decides to do is strip them of that kind of power by letting them keep their like pointless title, but moving them to a whole other section of the world. And that way they are cut off from anybody who knows them, who like feels loyalty towards them. And they are also just kind of thrown off by being in a strange land. And it's a really interesting tactic that I'm sure was definitely used, it makes a lot of sense, but it's something that never really occurred to me. And while, don't get me wrong, it's not like I feel bad for like nobility or anything, it does sort of suck to be in the position where just you existing is like a threat to somebody, that they need to do this kind of thing. So let's see, I'm trying to find, for example, a Kakru Count's eldest son might be ordered to resettle, taking his servants, mistresses, wives, cooks, and guards with him to Wolf's Paw, away in the old territories of Gan. And a Gan ducal clan's side branches might be told to pack themselves up and move to a city in Ryu. This way, even if the hot-blooded younger nobles wanted to make trouble, they would have no influence with the local elites and could inspire no sympathy in the local populace to join their cause. The emperor did the same with many of the surrendered soldiers and their families from the 6 conquered Tiro states. While the resettlement policy was very unpopular with the nobles, it did have the benefit of enriching the lives of the ordinary folks of the island of Dara. The resettled nobles craved food and clothes from their homelands, and merchants traveled all over Dara, transporting products that seemed exotic to the local populace, but were eagerly purchased by the exiled nobles, who yearned for a hint of home and their old ways of life. In this manner, the scattered nobles became teachers of taste for the commoners, who learned to be more cosmopolitan and ecumenical. Which I really like that. So it sort of begins a bit of globalization, where everybody starts to be exposed to many other cultures and just because of necessary traversing for homesick nobles, which is really interesting. Kyle says he gets called a gangster a lot, and that's the only gangstery thing we see him do so far. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. How many times people call him a gangster, and I was just like, that's really? But, and when we see this scene and the way that he handles it with her, I expected him to I expected something to follow this up, either that he was going to be violent with her, that he was going to have violent friends who, like, intervened, and it would turn out he was, like, in company of these sorts of people, but we haven't seen that yet, even though it's sort of said by various parties that he keeps bad company. So, yeah, I guess we'll wait to see what happens there. So, Cooney is, let's see, okay, right. So he's walking around through the downtown area, looking at all of the food that is available to buy and that he does not have the money to afford. And he's about to leave the market when he hears an old woman yelling at a guard, or a soldier, I guess, of some kind. I'm going to read this little bit because I thought it was really, like, it's one of those moments that feels really mean to actually say, but is so true. "Sir, please don't take him," an old woman dressed in the traditional garb of the Zana peasant, full of knotted tassels and the colorful geometric patches that were supposed to be symbols for good luck and prosperity, though the only people who wore them had neither, begged an imperial soldier. Ouch! Yo, but how true is that, though? The only people who ever have those kinds of symbols and whatever, it's always people who don't, and I mean, one could argue, well, if you need them, you're going to use them. If you don't need them, then you won't use them. But what about the people who used them and it worked for them? Don't see any of those. So she says, "He's only 15 and he's my youngest son. My eldest is already working at the mausoleum. The law says the last child can stay with me." And the soldier is telling her that he doesn't believe her little story about this being the youngest because she doesn't have any proof. "I've asked you for birth certificates for the two boys and you've produced nothing." And Kuni is looking at this guy and makes a pretty sharp assessment that I wonder how true it is. But he thinks to himself, the man had probably dodged out of having to fight during the Unification Wars, and then bribed his way into a commission in the Zana army as soon as peace had been declared, so he could get assigned to one of the conquered territories as a corvée administrator. It was his job to raise up the local quota of able-bodied men to work on one of the Emperor's grand infrastructure projects. It was a position with a little bit of power, but a lot of room for abuse. It was also very lucrative. Families who didn't want to see their sons conscripted were willing to pay a high price. So I really, it seems like this is true. Because this dude immediately is like, if you can't produce a birth certificate, you're going to have to pay a fee, which I'm sure is not, sanctioned. So finally she says, I'm willing to pay the fee, but you have to give me time. Business has not been good. And when she says this, she's interrupting him and he smacks her across the face. And her son, understandably, tries to step in and hit the guy back, and she has to stop her son. And she says, "Forgive my foolish son, you can hit me again for his faults." And the administrator spits at her, which is just, the whole thing is just so gross. And Cooney, watching this, sees the sadness on this woman's face, and it reminds him so much of his mother. Which apparently not enough for him to like straighten out his act, although he does wind up doing that, but it's not because of his mom. And he decides to step in. So what he does is he pretends that he is Finn Krukedori, which is the Krukedoris owned the Zudi's largest jewelry store, and Finn, the eldest son, had once tried to turn Kuni and his friends into the constabulary for disturbing the peace after Kuni humiliated him in a game of high-stakes dice. Finn's father was also known for being stingy and never spared a copper for any charity, but his son had a reputation as a spendthrift. So, what does he do? He pretends to be this guy. He knows how to forge a signature, and he basically writes a fake check that he seals with a seal that doesn't have enough definition to it for you to really even make out what it says, and uses that as like the official, you know, and gives it to the dudes like, okay, then go to the doorman when you have time and the servant will bring the money to you right away. Well then, this is great. This is like watching the beginning of Ocean's 8, where she's figuring out how to like get into the hotel. Like the whole, it's great. And the administrator who, you know, at first was being really rude to him, becomes very magnanimous at this point. A foolish and rich man like this Finn Krukedori was the best kind of local gentry to cultivate. You hear me? Gentry to cultivate. I'm always glad to make a new friend. Why don't we go and have a drink together? I thought you'd never ask, Kuni said. I didn't bring any cash with me, though, since I'm just out to get some air. Next time I'll invite you home for the braised eel. But this time, maybe I can borrow some? No problem. No problem at all. What are friends for? This motherfucker. Oh, you. So, as he's looking, like, walking away, he turns and looks at the woman. He blinked to clear his suddenly warm eyes, winked at her in reassurance, and turned around once more to joke with the corvée administrator. The woman's son gently shook her arm by the shoulder. Ma, let's get going. We should leave town before that pig changes his mind. And she says, after Kuni, you may act lazy and foolish, but I have seen your heart. A bright and tenacious flower will not bloom in obscurity. A bright and tenacious flower, perhaps like a dandelion? Perhaps like the flower on the cover of this book? And meanwhile, a woman has observed this whole thing. There was something about this young man who tried to do good without seeming to be too good. She wanted to know him better. And then we get to meet Giammattisa. So, the chapter entitled Giammattisa, like when you read, for example, to bring up Song of Ice and Fire again, chapters that are named after different characters, it means that that chapter is going to be entirely from the perspective of that character. That is not the case in this book. Giammattisa is a perspective in this character, and we see more of her. But it is not entirely from her perspective. This chapter actually starts out with Kuni again. And he's hanging out with Rin. He's actually hanging out with a few friends. Rin, Than, and Kogo, I think is the name of one of them. Yeah, Kogo. And Rin Koda says something like, every time I see your mother, she sighs and tells me to be a good friend and encourage you to get a job. Your father stopped me on the way here and told me that you were a bad influence on me. His father's comment bothered Kuni more than he wanted to admit. Which, I wonder which part. Like, is it the fact that my father is saying that I'm a bad influence on someone else instead of the usual parent thing, which is admonishing someone for being a bad influence on their own child? Is it the fact that he thinks maybe he is a bad influence and it makes him feel kind of guilty because he sort of was a big factor in Rin getting expelled from school? Like, because apparently, you know, that school wasn't free, too. So, like, that's some money down the drain. And then we have Than, who says, every time one of us offers to find you a job, you come up with some ridiculous objection. You don't want to work with me because you think horses are scared of you. You don't want to help Kogo because you think civil service is boring. You don't want to go with Rin because you claim Master Loing would be ashamed to see you dropping allusions to the classics he taught you in Soldiers' Love Letters. What do you want to do? And I like this. In truth, Kuni thought he would have enjoyed peppering Soldiers' Love Letters with Master Loing's pearls of wisdom, but he hadn't wanted to take away business from Rin, as he knew he was the better writer. But such reasons could never be spoken aloud. Listen, that may sound like an incredibly arrogant, dickish thing, but there are just some things that you know you're better at than another person. And I have 100% been in the position of deciding not to pursue something because a friend was already pursuing it, and I knew I was better and that it would upset them, and so I did not do it. And that sounds so arrogant, but I can't help what was going on. That's exactly what was happening, and that was the choice that I made. And in many ways, I regret that because I held myself back in order to make someone else feel better and compromise some of the things that I could have accomplished in that time simply like for what? Someone's feelings? Like, I mean, is that worthy? I don't know that in the end it is, but this situation's a little different. I'm sorry, I like choked on some dust or something just now because it's Rin's actual livelihood. So I feel like that's a different situation. You know, this isn't something that he's like, well, I just don't want to outshine him and make him resent me. It's, I don't want to outshine him and have him begging in the street because I like stole his job, which, you know, considering that he was part of Rin getting kicked out of school, it seems like the least he could do at this point. So I have to agree with that. So he says, I'm waiting for the right opportunity, Than and Rin finished for him in unison. You're improving, said Rin. You only say that once every other day now. I think I understand, Than said. You're waiting for the mayor to come to you with a palanquin, draped in silk, begging to present you to the emperor as the flower of Zudi. And then Kogo comes into the conversation and suggests that Kuni come with him to a party that is going to be at the mayor's house because he thinks that, you know, if Kuni is serious about the right opportunity, he'll probably meet somebody there worth meeting that will change his future for him. As it turns out, Kogo is quite right, but it is not in the way that any of them expected, I don't think. I like the description of Kogo too. He was older than Kuni by about 10 years, a diligent and studious man. He had passed the Imperial Civil Service examination with high marks. But as he was from an undistinguished family, not tapped into the network of patronage in the bureaucracy, being a clerk of the third rank in the city government was probably as high as he would ever rise in the civil service. However, he liked his job. The mayor, a Zana man who had bought this sinecure. Right, what's a sinecure? I'm looking this up right now. Come on at me, dictionary. Man, this dictionary takes a minute. I'm getting the beach ball. Here it is. A position requiring little or no work but giving the holder status or financial benefit. No shit. How did I not know this word sooner? This is an extremely useful word. Sinecure is how you pronounce it. Okay. The mayor, a Zana man who had bought this sinecure but had no real interest in administration, relied on Kogo's advice for most decisions. Kogo was fascinated by matters of local governance and had a knack for solving the mayor's problems. So that's interesting. The mayor isn't like obviously elected because there was a takeover and there's an emperor, so that's not how this works. But he like purchased his way into this spot and then is basically like, you do the work though. And Kogo's like, no, yeah, okay. I like it. Sure. Others might see Kuni as lazy, idle, and destined for the poorhouse or a life of crime. But Kogo liked Kuni's easy manners and his flashes of brilliance. Kuni was original, and that was more than could be said for most people in Zudi. Having Kuni there to joke with would relieve the monotony of the party for him. So it seems that the point of the party is for everybody to bring gifts. The mayor's friend, a man by the name of Matiza, has just moved to Zuri. He's a wealthy rancher from up in Old Fasa who somehow got in trouble with the local magistrate. He's moving here to start over, but most of his assets are tied up in flocks and herds up there that can't be quickly converted to cash. The mayor is holding a welcoming party for him. The real point of the party, of course, is to get the guests to bring lots of gifts for this Matiza in order to impress the mayor and thus solve his cash flow problem, said Than. So Kogo's like, obviously, my friend Kuni can't afford one of these big presents that we're obliged to bring. So he will have to come as hired help. And Kuni's like, no, I don't think so. And he insists that he's going to come as a guest, even though Kogo is like, dude, I'm serious. Like, you need to have money to get into this. I don't know what you're planning on doing. And he friggin'... Okay, first I want to read this little. Kuni arrived by himself. He had put on a clean undershirt and his least patched robe and washed his hair. He wasn't drunk. This counted as dressing up for him. So Kunigaru winked at Kogo, reached into the folds of his sleeves, and took out a crisp sheet of paper folded into thirds. You've surely mistaken me for someone else. I'm Finn Krukadori, and I've brought with me 1,000 silver pieces. Here's a note to be drawn on my account at the house office. Before Kogo could answer, a woman's voice interrupted. Such an honor to see the famous Master Krukadori again. Koga and Kuni turned their heads and saw through the gate a young woman barely in her 20s, standing in the courtyard. She looked at Kuni with a mischievous smile. Her light complexion and curly, bright red hair, common in Fasa, stood out a little in Zuri, but Kuni was struck most by her eyes. Diran-shaped, they seemed to be pools of dark green wine. Any man who looked into them was doomed to lose his way. And she basically completely calls him out and is like, now, as adorable as this is, the guy you're pretending to be is inside, so they know what he looks like. I've met him already, and I just seem to remember seeing you a couple days ago. And he really tries to, like, just roll with it, and it's so, like... So she says, I'm Gia Matiza, the daughter of the man you intend to cheat. Cheat is such a strong word, Kuni said, without missing a beat. I had heard that Master Matiza's daughter is a great beauty, as rare as the Diran among fish. My hope was to have my friend Kogzi here, let me in under false pretenses so that I could have a chance to admire her. But now that I have accomplished my goal without having to go in, Kogo's honor and mine are intact. I shall take my leave. And she just finds this hilarious. Like, this just to her is so charming. And we get a little bit of a thing of, like, a prophecy, which I'm not sure how I feel about this, but I'm going to go with it. When she was 12 years old, Gia stole some of her teacher's dream herbs. She dreamed of a man who wore a plain gray cotton tunic. What can you offer me? She asked. Hardship, loneliness, long flowing heartache, he said. She could not see his face, but she liked the sound of his voice, gentle and serious, but with a hint of laughter in it. That doesn't sound like a good match, she said. Good matches are not the stuff of stories and songs, he said. For every pain we endure together, there will be a joy twice as great. They will still sing of us in 1,000 years. She saw that he had changed into a yellow silk robe, and he kissed her, and he tasted of salt and wine, and she knew that he was the man she was destined to marry. So, then we go to Gia, who is in the middle of fantasizing or daydreaming about Kuni while she's supposed to be meeting a guy that her matchmaker set her up with. Obviously, the matchmaker is there, the man himself is there, and her mother is there, because of course these kinds of things are like really chaperoned. And this dude is a mess. The young man who sat before her now was not ugly, Gia decided, but he seemed to have gone out of his way to make himself appear so. His eyes roamed all over Gia's face and body, eyes devoid of any sign of intelligence, and a tiny rivulet of spittle hung from the corner of his mouth. Oh, God. Gross. And also, it really is the kind of thing, when people describe someone as having intelligent eyes, you know exactly what they mean, right? Like, but what is it, though? Like, I've really tried to put my finger on it when I've met different people, because there are just folks that you meet and immediately you can see from their eyes, there's not a lot going on. And then there are people that you immediately can tell, all right, they're on the ball, they're sharp. But it's hard for me to, like, put my finger on what exactly distinguishes one look from another. Kind of a glassiness, maybe, or just a sort of like lack of curiosity to the way they're observing the room. I don't know, but this just really, and we get to find out like about a bit of the conversation that she had with Kuni at the party, and they had really great chemistry, and he is talking to her about like his interpretation of a poem, and the whole thing is just really adorable. So she, it turns out, has had a really hard time finding anybody that she likes. And it's not like she's unwilling to marry somebody for the sake of, what's the word? Practicality. You don't get the sense that she's just flat out like, this is not a consideration at all. But being happy is part of it. Like, she's not willing to completely sacrifice herself. And she asks him where he'll be in 10 years. And he acts like Tato's face grew even blanker. But after a few awkward moments, his face wrinkled into a wide smile. Ah, I understand the question now. Don't worry, sweet one. In 10 years, I expect to have my own mansion by the lake. Like, any woman who has engaged in online dating and had to endure the terrible texts from men who are clueless knows how creepy it is for the platitudes of like sweet one to come from someone that you like don't know at all. And also for them to like make claims about where they're headed in life that are just so obviously either flat out false or like a man thinking way too much of himself. It's hard to know sometimes. Is he lying or is he just that naive? So she, and then we will have at least 5 children, Tato added magnanimously, maybe even more. Surely you see me as more than just a field for you to plow, Gia said. The matchmaker poked her under the table again. Oh man, I love that. So she sets him up and asks him to write a poem, and that if he writes something that she likes, she'll marry him. And she leaves and it like waits for him. She tells him that he has an hour. And in the meantime, her mother comes in and says, how many eligible young men must you send off ranting and raving? We spoke to your first matchmaker back in the year of the toad, and now it's the year of the Krubin. Mother, don't you want your daughter to be happy? Of course I do, but you seem determined to become an old maid. But Mama, then I would get to stay with you forever. Is there something you're not telling me? A secret admirer, perhaps? Gia said nothing, but looked away. This had always been her habit. She would not lie, and so she would refuse to answer if what she had to say would not be welcomed. Her mother sighed. So he writes her a friggin' poem. Your hair is like fire. Your eyes are like water. I want you to be my wife. Your beauty gives new meaning to life. Oh, goodness. So she writes back, your eyes are like empty wells. Your drool like an inchworm. I want you to have a wife. How about this matchmaker? She's good at poking. Doesn't even try and rhyme it at the end, guys. That's how little she gives a shit. And he gets up with the matchmaker, and they both storm out. So, in this time, she starts to hang out with Kuni a lot more. And Kuni takes her to the river to tea houses, to gazebos and trees to nap under them, to bars. And she is having a really good time because she doesn't have to worry about what is acceptable behavior in any of these places. She can just be herself and relax, which, what a concept, right? In turn, Gia showed Kuni a new universe that he had never paid much attention to. The grasses at his feet and the bushes lining the long country lanes. At first, his interest had been feigned. He thought her lips far more interesting than the flowers, whose uses she tried to explain. But after she showed him how chewing ginger and evening primrose did wonders for his frequent hangovers, he became a true disciple. So then they have an interesting little conversation about a lot of plants and mushrooms and things naturally growing near the thing that will cure the poison the first plant makes. This is actually not one plant, but two. The leaves belong to a grass called mercy flax. The flowers are called crow's bane. So it turns out crow's bane are these flowers that a lot of crows can't seem to resist despite it being poisonous, and they bring it back to their nests and slowly die from their vapors and juices. But the other plant, mercy flax, is a natural antidote. One of the principles of herbal lore is the prevalence of such pairings. The deadly seven-step snake of Fasa nests in shady coves where the crying boy mushroom, which secretes an antivenom, likes to grow. The fiery salamander weed, a good hot spice for cold winter nights, grows better next to the snowdrop, known for its power to relieve fevers. Creation seems to favor making friends of those destined to be enemies. And Kuni is like, who knew that all of this is so philosophical and wise? And she says, oh, you're surprised? Because the art of herbal healing is a woman's art, beyond the notice of real scholars and doctors. And he turns and bows to her and says, I spoke in ignorance. I meant no disrespect. Which I do like, because I don't think that's what he meant at all. But I like the fact that that's where her mind goes, because, yeah, girl, I see you. I feel you. And when he asks her what her favorite plant is, she says the dandelion, and she talks about all of these things the dandelion can do that I'm very curious how much of this is true, because I don't know much about it, except for the fact that if you've ever tasted dandelion, like stem juice, it's the bitterest thing you will ever have put in your mouth, and it's like straight nail polish remover. It's disgusting. So when she talks about eating them, I can't imagine that. Why? But I'm going to read this. It's hardy and determined, adaptable and practical. The flower looks like a small chrysanthemum, but it's much more resourceful and far less delicate. Poets may compose odes about the chrysanthemum, but the dandelion's leaves and flowers can fill your belly. Its sap cure your warts. Its roots calm your fevers. Dandelion tea makes you alert, while chewing its root can steady a nervous hand. The milk of the dandelion can even be used to make invisible ink that reveals itself when mixed with the juice of the stone's ear mushroom. It's a versatile and useful plant people can rely on. And it's playful and fun. She picked up a puffball and blew at it, scattering the tiny feathered seeds into the air. So that feels like Kuni, right? And when he says the chrysanthemum is a noble flower, I feel that's her. She says, it's the last flower to bloom in autumn, defiant against winter. Its fragrance is exquisite and overwhelms all competition. In tea, it awakens the spirit. In bouquets, it dominates the arrangement. But it is not a flower that endears. Which feels like that could be about her. What do you think, guys? Dandelion and a chrysanthemum? And he talks about how he kind of made a promise to himself to always do the most interesting thing. And she asks why he felt the need to make that promise at all. Why not just do that? And he's like, well, because in the moment, oftentimes the most interesting thing is the hardest thing and the scariest thing. So you have to remind yourself that you made a promise or else you don't do it. And she says, I believe you will do great things. How do you know you're not being fooled? I'm too smart to be fooled, she answered without hesitation, and they embraced, careless who saw. Kuni felt like he was the luckiest man in the world. He had no money to pay her father a proper bride price, but he had to marry her. Sometimes the most interesting thing is also the most boring thing, the responsible thing, Kuni said to himself, which true words, sir. It's so true. So he goes to his friend to get a job. Kogo finds him a job to be a guard and escort prisoners when they're being sent to work assignments. And Kuni kind of hates it, but he needs this job as collateral for a loan so that he could go to Gia's parents and say that he has enough money to be a viable option as a partner for her. Gilo Matiza could not understand it. By all accounts, Kunigaru was an indolent young man with no useful skills and no prospects. He had no money, no property, and until recently no job. Even his own family had thrown him out. He was also rumored to enjoy the company of loose women and had many girlfriends. Why did his daughter, known to all the matchmakers as impossible to please, favor this man's suit? And so Gilo talks to him, and he quotes the fucking same poem that he claimed was about a guy waking up alone in a brothel, but he changes the meaning of it here. He quotes, "The world is drunk, I alone am sober. The world is asleep, but I am awake." Gilo was surprised. He did not expect a quote from Kokuru classics. What does that have to do with your suit? The poet was speaking of the experience of sudden clarity after a life of doubt. Until I met Gia and you, I did not understand what the poem meant. Sir, a reformed man is worth 10 men virtuous from birth, for he understands temptation and will strive the harder not to stray. Gilo sighed and accepted Kuni's marriage proposal. So he goes home and tells his parents that he's getting married, and his parents are so happy that his mother's like crying over Gia and telling her that she saved her son. There was a big wedding paid for by Gilo that became the talk of Zudi for many days. Although Gilo refused to support the couple in a lavish lifestyle, since you picked him, you have to live within the means of his salary. Gia's dowry allowed the couple to get a small house, and Kuni no longer had to calculate how long he had before he wore out a friend's patience and had to find another place to sleep. He went to work every morning and sat in his office and filled out reports and made his hourly rounds to be sure that the listless men held in prison weren't up to any mischief while they waited to be sent to labor in the grand tunnels or the mausoleum. In no time at all, he hated his job. Now he really felt he was drifting. He complained to Gia daily. "Do not fret, my husband," said Gia. "They also serve who only stand and wait. There is a time for flight and a time for descent, a time for movement and a time for rest, a time to do and a time to prepare. Opportunity comes in many forms. What is luck but being ready with the snare when the rabbit bolts from his hole? You've made many friends in Zudi over the years, but the point is, now that you're a member of Zudi's officialdom, you have a chance to make different kinds of friends. Trust yourself that this is only temporary. Take advantage of it to spread your circles. I know you like people." And he starts to take her advice on that and really listens to her and begins to cultivate relationships with different people and goes and hangs out with fellow clerks in tea houses after work, visits at the homes of senior officials from time to time. He was humble, respectful, and listened more than he spoke. When he found people he liked, he and Gia would invite them and their families to their little home for deeper conversation. "I had thought of them as the dull sort," said Kuni, "but they're not so bad once you get to know them. They're just different than my old friends." "A bird needs both long and short feathers to fly," said Gia. "You need to learn to work with different kinds of people." Kuni nodded, glad of Gia's wisdom. So this is like the ideal situation that I hope lasts but can't kind of thing, where he's found somebody that makes it feel worthwhile to him, that he can settle down. And this is really something that I feel like unfortunately gets laid at the feet of women too often. In this case, it was not ever something that like was presented to Gia, but I feel like a lot of women will meet somebody like Kuni and be like, am I the one that will inspire him to finally settle down? And they use whether or not they can change a man's behavior as a sort of like marker as to their own worth. And it's a really hard thing to watch happen, because I think we've all had friends who seemed to judge whether or not they were a great boyfriend or girlfriend by whether or not they could get someone who was a problem child to change completely. And it's just the kind of thing that, like, if you're, the thing about Gia and Kuni is that Gia, like, gets with him and is sort of like, listen, I accept who you are. I know who you are, and that's fine. But you do need to diversify what you do. She's not trying to change him. She's just trying to get him to, like, use the skills that he's already got and expand his circle of influence, which is smart, and it's very different than trying to get somebody to just change who they are. However, Kuni is not really content. He felt in a way that he could not explain that he was meant to live more than the life he was living, destined to one day soar high into the air like these dandelion seeds, like the kite rider he had seen long ago. He was like a seed still tethered to the withered flower, just waiting for the dead air of the late summer evening to break, for the storm to begin. So, I feel like that's not great, but we'll see where that goes. Because obviously, there's going to be like some sort of civil war, right? Like, this has to happen. But I don't know what kind of role he's going to play, because we met the other one whose whole family was murdered, and he was this super physically imposing dude that's obviously going to be like the fighter. So is he going to team up with Kuni? Is something going to happen there? Like, I feel like Kuni is going to have a role in this, but I don't know what that even looks like. I could see this kid like getting sent to the prison that Kuni works in. I don't know. But in any case, I'm very curious as to what's going to happen there. And I just flew through these two chapters. Like, it was just really interesting to me. And like I said, I have no problem with romance as long as it's like taken care of in a smart way. And I feel like this was really heartwarming in how much everybody decided to like cooperate with each other. Like, her own family was like, you could have gotten all right, fine. You clearly like the guy and you're a pain in the ass. So sure, go date this guy. And I find that to be adorable somehow. And I am just, it's been 21 years since this war. That's a while. I wonder I don't know, what's going to be the thing that like motivates everybody to sort of organize, because I feel like that's got to be coming. But we'll see. So if there aren't any other questions, Kyle, I'm going to give you a second to write anything out if you're interested. You guys, if you're interested in commissioning an episode, you can go to unspoiledpodcast.com/shop and commission one there. When you go to place your commission, there will be a link to a table so that you can double check that whatever you're looking for has not already been commissioned by somebody else. I am going to be I'm going to be recording the finale episode of Westworld tonight with Rashawn. So if you're into Westworld, season 2 is wrapping, so you guys should check that out. And the finale episode of Daredevil I'm recording on Monday, so that'll be fun. Kyle says, glad you're liking it. Cool, I am liking it, yeah. All right, everybody. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Thank you again to Kyle for commissioning this. And I will see you all soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.